Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 11 of the Polling Station podcast. My name's Ernie Pykopoulos, CEO of Polity Research. I'll be your host. And I'm thinking of renaming this podcast The Two Daves and Ernie because these two Daves, you can see on the screen, are legacy guests, I would say. They've been involved in multiple episodes of this podcast. We only have a short time here on Zoom, thanks to the Zoom gods giving us only about 40 minutes. So I want to jump right in. Obviously, let me just introduce my guests more formally. David Paleologos, who is director of the Suffolk University Research Center, and Dave Williams, who is president of Williams and Associates, polling firm in Salem, Massachusetts. Is that a picture of Salem behind you?
That is a picture of a steamboat called Rhode Island. It's the Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So I'm trying to cover two states at once.
Very good. Roger Williams would be proud. Yes.
Indeed. Quaker that he is.
Yes. All right. We're going to quickly do the whole drink thing. I'm actually not drinking Peet's coffee this time. I want to give a shout out to a local couple of young girls who are running a thing called the Andover Artisan Roasters. They're kind of high-end coffee makers. So I want to say hello to them. And so that's what I'm drinking. How about you, Dave Paleologos? Anything?
Well, I just had a Dunkin' coffee with a shot of Kahlua, so that's about as close to high end as I got today.
Around here, that's high end. Yeah. Dunkin'. Yeah. Dave, you always have something interesting, Dave Williams. What do you got?
Not today. I'm drinking ice water out of my Yeti, but I will tell you my new favorite drink is now a Gibson, which is essentially a martini with pickled onions in it instead of olives. But
okay.
Yeah.
Again, an interesting insight into Dave Williams. All right, let's get rolling here. In case any of you forgot, I got to just run down what happened on November 5th real quickly. I think it's safe to say that Donald Trump put together a voting alliance on that day that none of us really foresaw to the extent that it happened. He did better among women and minorities than he did in 2016 and 2020. He actually won 4 in 10 non-white male voters. Amazingly, he also won almost half of immigrants, Gen Z voters, millennials, and voters in union households. A coalition I don't think any of us expected before November 5th. And of course, he won the Electoral College and the popular vote, got both houses of Congress under his sway. So I guess the global question for both of you is, was this election an affirmation of Trump's kind of worldview, which we can call transactional nationalism or something like that? Or was it just a repudiation of democratic progressive policies over the last 4 years or so? So what do you think? Dave Paleologos, you want to start? Or is it a combination of both of those?
Yeah, I would say a combination of both. We polled just black voters in Michigan and black voters in Pennsylvania exclusively, which was data that was constantly referred to because we had 500 likely voters in both of those polls. And these polls came out, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks before the election. Kamala Harris was winning black voters, but not by the margin she needed to. She needed to win black voters 92-7 like Biden did in the exit polls. And because young black men were pushing back and Trump was getting 18 to 20% of them in those two states, we kind of saw that in the data. We did a Hispanic poll in Arizona and in Nevada. Same thing, young Hispanic men and middle-aged Hispanic men in both states were not only increasing their margins for Trump, but they were actually winning. Trump was winning in those demographics. So that's what I kind of expected. What I didn't expect was that the female vote was going to be muted and more subdued than it was. the thinking in the Democratic camp, I believe, was that they knew they were going to lose women, and they were going out and getting men, and they were winning men by wider and wider margins in the polling. But the thinking was that Harris had $1 billion. She spent a ton of money, that she was going to outpull on election day women who just would revolt against the person who was a convicted felon. And so that arithmetic just didn't work for them. And Trump went on to win pretty comfortably.
Dave Williams, what do you think? Was this an affirmation of Trump's policies, or like a repudiation of the past 4 years of Democratic progressive policy?
I think it's again a little bit of both, but when you're running against a 70-30 wrong direction, right direction, that's a pretty substantial headwind to overcome, despite the demographics. I think what's really interesting in this is that there's been this sense, and I'm not sure whether this is an example of what's really happening here, but I mean, we saw it during with Reagan, that there was this sort of realignment of the political parties to some degree.
Yeah.
And I think most political scientists would say that Reagan's was a secular realignment. It was one that was done specifically because of who Ronald Reagan was and his policies, and sort of a reaction beyond that. But it was not a total realignment. And I think what we've been seeing over the past few years is that this realignment of the Republican and Democratic parties was accelerated a little bit. And we're going to have to see, I think the next several elections are going to be pretty interesting on whether this is just a secular realignment, that just this response to Donald Trump as he is, his policies, so on and so forth, or whether this is really a significant realignment in terms of party support levels. Where, I mean, you've seen it over, for the past few years that upper income, intellectual, East Coast folks, again, these are a lot of what traditionally has been sort of part of the Republican base, the sort of regular Republican base, has kind of moved over to the Democratic side, where ethnic, lower education, lower income demographic, the sort of blue collar vote, has been moving to the Republicans. And again, we've seen this in several elections here in the States, particularly in Massachusetts, where you've seen these sort of traditional Democratic strongholds kind of trending a little bit more Republican lately, and these traditional Republican strongholds like the suburbs and bedroom communities kind of trending more Democratic.
Yeah, which may be why over the weekend, or this past couple of days, Charlie Baker's floating this notion that he may be running for the Senate in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, particularly if you look at the Teamsters and their reaction throughout most of this election. I mean, again, they're one union, but they are a very big union, I think, a very strong, traditional.
Yeah.
And, it's always been sort of that that in my dealings with Republican candidates, that, the union hierarchy generally trends towards the Democrats, whereas union rank and file tends towards the Republicans, at least over the past 20 years. And I think the leadership is starting to catch up with their rank and file.
Yeah. Yeah. Just on that point real quickly, I saw an interview with the head of the Teamsters, O'Brien, I think his name is, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Who's from Charlestown. He's a local guy. And he was talking about, the Teamsters had this conclave for all the candidates where they brought them into their headquarters and they asked the same 16 questions to all of the candidates. And Harris refused to answer all 16. She would only answer 3. And as she walked out of the room, which was rank and file people, O'Brien himself, and his board, and on her way out, she said, "I'm going to win without you guys, with you guys or without you guys." Which to me was a bit of a miscalculation on, as you say, a constituency that is supposed to be one of the underpinnings of a Democratic presidential campaign. So anyway, let's get to some of the actual factors that may have come into play in the race. Dave Paleologos, let's start with you. That most people talk about the economy and immigration being the two big drivers of the vote, whereas social issues, like as you alluded to too, that you would think would appeal to women, like choice issues, kind of faded into the background, and pocketbook, immigration, and some other issues took precedence. Is that what you saw in your polling too? And you think that was a key factor?
Yeah, if you look back 4 years, the top two issues in the presidential election in 2020 were COVID and the economy. And Biden was winning overwhelmingly among those who said COVID, and Trump was winning overwhelmingly among those who said the economy. So
yeah,
it was kind of a wash at that point. You fast forward to this election, the number one issue was the economy, number two issue was immigration, two landslide issues for Trump. And so there was no room in the top two issues. And you couple for Harris, and if you couple that with like Dave Williams said, the right track, wrong track numbers, which were kind of the backdrop before which immigration and the economy were set.
right.
That triangulation was a death knell for Harris.
Yeah, Dave Williams, do you agree that it seems like those two were the key drivers, but somewhat surprisingly, I thought that that the choice issues would have, as they did in the midterms in 2022, would have a much bigger impact.
Yeah,
I guess it was just so overwhelming with pocketbook issues and immigration.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that the Democratic Party for a long time has been employing micro-targeting in terms of assembling their coalition, where they try and break things down into little tiny bits, and if they can get enough of those little tiny bits together, I'm trying to remember. I know this was a big thing in Hillary Clinton's campaign. Obviously, that did not work. Penn and Schoen, I think, used to do a lot of. There were heavy proponents of this sort of micro-targeting. Mm-hmm. And I think what you saw in this one, as Dave Paleologos points out, this turned out to be more of a macro issue.
Yeah.
And I don't think you get away from the fact that, and I know the Democrats are kind of, or some on the liberal side are kind of poo-pooing the idea that, people are willing to trade. They were more concerned about the price of eggs than they were about sort of ensuring that democracy would continue, which I think is just sort of a really specious argument. But it wasn't just eggs, it was basically everything. Right. You look at what your property taxes have gone up, home insurance has gone up, your car insurance has gone up. I mean, I think that economy became a hugely macro issue that affected everybody. And when you pile on, as Dave said, that the immigration issue, I mean, you can see it. Just almost everywhere that you go, what the financial impact has been on. So immigration in itself is a big issue, but in many places, like here in Massachusetts, that issue actually rolls right into the economic issue because It increases the cost of everybody in the state.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken, that the economic issue kind of was impactful throughout the voting population. It was no regard for race, for gender, for anything. It affected everybody every day. Every time you went to the gas pump, every time you went to the Stop and Shop, you felt it for pretty much for the entire 4-year period. Let's talk a little bit. One thing I think has been overlooked a little bit in terms of the key factors in the outcome is the fact that the Republican establishment learned a lot from 2020. Particularly the non-traditional voting techniques that really helped Biden and propelled him to that pretty big victory. And I think a big factor this year was the fact that the Republican turnout effort embraced those non-traditional voting techniques this time and did a damn good job of it, frankly. Not just mail balloting, but turning out kind of low propensity voters, non-traditional Republican voters, like, the whole Turning Point operation that did an amazing job with, young college guys on campuses all across the country and, essentially gave that whole constituency to Trump. So I think That's kind of a hidden little thing. I mean, people don't talk about it too much, but I think the Republican National Committee did an amazing job in doing a 180 really from their past orientation. And, despite what Trump would say at his rallies when he was poo-pooing mail balloting and so forth, they embraced it and they ran with it and did a hell of a good job. Uh, Dave Paleologos, you want to comment on how you saw that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was kind of male dominance. If you want to think about all categories of males, it wasn't just the college educated men who kind of had been exposed to COVID, learning under COVID, and getting indoctrinated with a lot of the DEI stuff, which they were opposed to, and tapping into that. And also Hispanics. I mean, the advertising and traditional media and social media with Hispanics. I remember we were in the field. We were polling last time we were polling Pennsylvania. It's about a week, 10 days out. We did the statewide poll, and then we were doing the two bellwethers, Erie and Northampton County. Now, for your listeners, Northampton County has about 3 times as many Hispanics than the statewide vote. The statewide, Pennsylvania's got about 5% Hispanics. The Northampton County's got like 15 or thereabout. So we were in the field the night that Puerto Rican floating garbage can, Puerto Rico's a floating garbage can comment came out. And I was expecting, and Northampton County, by the way, runs more left than Erie County and more left than the statewide. So we're starting to get the numbers back, and it was more Trump. For the second, third, and fourth days after that comment came out, we ended up releasing Northampton. I thought we were wrong. We ended up releasing Northampton County Trump +2. Erie was even, and the statewide was even. And I was like, this can't be right. Northampton County, 3 times as many Hispanic voters, has got to be more left.
Yeah.
In other polls, and it turned out the opposite. So the kind of embedded, ingrained identification and pulling out those votes in that community superseded any comment that was made at the rally or any of the implications.
Yeah.
And what made matters worse for the Democrats is that they were saying, oh, Kamala's got momentum in Pennsylvania. They were putting this narrative out, oh, she's got momentum, there's excitement. And I was looking at 3 polls in Pennsylvania that we were taking at the exact same time saying, I'm not seeing any increase in enthusiasm. But, you wait till you see the results and then you try and figure it out.
Yeah, you're right. The Harris campaign tried to take advantage of that comment, which was at the Madison Square Garden rally, right? I think
Sure.
It was his Trump rally. But yeah, as a pollster, I can understand that when you look at data that is counterintuitive to what you think it should be, you almost want to look to see if the columns were switched somehow.
Right.
But Dave Williams, you remember that, I think.
That never happens, sir.
No, that
Come
never
on,
happens.
that never happens.
But
Yeah.
Dave Williams,
No.
you had a long history of dealing with Republican Party candidates. Do you agree with me that this Republican effort this time, embracing early voting techniques, was way out of character and an extremely smart move?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it, I was just looking at the numbers over again, and it's a 1.6% margin, in terms of raw vote.
Yeah.
Nationally. So every poll is great. And it's something that typically Republicans don't do. I think the first time I ever saw a very concerted polling effort was when, George W. Bush ran. They had a fantastic, voter identification, method where they were just registering voters, identifying potential voters, but polling them has always been a problem for Republicans. From a campaign perspective, we always say there's 3 M's that you have to have. You have to have message, you have to have money, and you have to have mechanics or muscle, however you want to put it. And the Republicans have always lacked with muscle in terms of polling on election day. pulling before election day, you don't get the muscle, you don't need as much. It's the same effort, but it's an effort that's spread out over more time. And I think the Republicans finally figured that out, and used it extensively to their advantage. And again, I'm against it. I'm a traditional guy. I like voting on election day. That's my favorite thing. I don't like early voting because things happen. If the timing had worked out a little bit differently and the debate between Trump and Biden had happened after early voting had begun, I would be really pissed off if I was a Biden voter, and then I'd already voted for him and then see this guy's just non-mentis, just not there. So that's why I'm against it. But I think, the reality of the situation is once that door has been opened, once that wedge is in the door and there's early voting that's allowed, you're not going to stop it. So you might as well figure out a way to deal with it. And I agree with you entirely. I think the National Committee did an unbelievable job in one coming to that conclusion that if we're going to play in this game, we got to play in the same field that they're playing with. And, not traditionally having done that, to be able to come up with a plan and actually implement that plan very early on, I think was what pushed this thing over the edge.
Yeah, yeah. Let me talk about another thing, another potential factor. And Dave Paleologos, you alluded to this a little bit earlier, that the kind of waning influence of legacy media, or what's called legacy media, and the upsurge of kind of non-traditional media sources like social media and other sources. Voters can get their information now from literally thousands of, portals. And nobody watches, the Walter Cronkite paradigm just doesn't exist anymore. Nobody watches those shows. Nobody gets their news from them. There's been a waning influence on even some of the cable networks, including Fox, which still dominates, but just doesn't have the same influence. So what do you think about that as part of what happened? That nobody was buying anything that the legacy media said, and they went elsewhere to get their to get their cues about how to vote. Dave Paleologos?
So that was a pronounced impact in this election. I mean, the viewers, everybody wants the 25 to 54, ideal demographic, but that demographic is really dropping off. Majority of people who watch the cable news, whatever it is, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, those viewers are older, and because you look at the ads they run.
Yeah.
Look at the advertisements that are run on those shows, and they're basically for older baby boomers and older than that. And that's it. I mean, I have two sons that are somewhat politically involved. They've never watched a cable news show. No, they've never watched it. Anything. They listen to podcasts or view podcasts. And so you can't reach them advertising on those traditional media sources. And so I think it was a shock to CNN and MSNBC, especially given that, what they were pushing out as major news stories wasn't even reality. It wasn't showing up in the polling. And it certainly wasn't resonating with anyone under 60. And they learned a lesson. Fox's decline isn't necessarily part of Fox's decline is the rise of One American News Network, Newsmax, and other competitors. Plus, you got Joe Rogan, and his podcast and other podcasts they're the new Walter Cronkites now, and people are looking at them, and the cable news is just a dinosaur.
Yeah, and famously, Harris refused to go on the Joe Rogan podcast, right?
Right.
Which is the number one podcast in the world, simply because she didn't want to travel to his location in Texas or something, right? It's just
that was one of the deal breakers,
Dave Williams, what do you think about this?
I mean, I I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the media has always been bifurcated, and for those of us who deal with it, know, that the algorithms increasingly determine what news is placed on what either newspaper or radio broadcast you're listening to, but especially in terms of television, they're heavily involved in making sure that the content that they put out matches the demographic of their viewers. So it's an echo chamber. It just keeps going round and round. They keep talking the same thing. And I thought, one of the interesting things that I heard, I don't know how true it is, was that Trump, who's always been kind of non-traditional anyway, was led to a lot of the social media stuff by his son Barron. Yeah. Barron supposedly convinced him that he should go on Joe Rogan, that he should be doing more of these podcast type things. Which, if that is true, it's fascinating that, one, that he listens to his kid in that respect, and two, that he actually, and again, he's a roll the dice kind of guy. What do I have to lose? I'm not getting what he perceived as not getting a fair shake on any of the cable news networks or any of the traditional legacy media. Why not take this different approach and see if we can, if you can't get over it, you can't go under it, you got to go around it. Yep. And I think he successfully did that.
Yep, I agree. Let's turn to a little navel gazing here and look at our own industry, and get an assessment of how you think we did as an industry. We obviously got a lot of criticism in 2012, 2016, 2020, not 2012, excuse me, 2016 and 2020. Much of it undeserved, I would argue, but perception is reality, as we know very well as pollsters. In general, how do you think the industry did? I saw one thing that if you take together all of the public polling, 48 out of the 50 state polling averages were right on target, which leads me to what I want to discuss with you guys is that should our industry be shifting from the model of doing a national poll in all 50 states to concentrating maybe more on bigger sample regional polling and or bigger sample swing state polling and trying to educate the public about the problems really with national samples on a presidential election being predictive. What do you think? First of all, how do we do? And then what do you think about maybe shifting the emphasis to regional polling? We only have about 10 minutes left, by the way. Zoom is telling me so.
Okay. I'll jump in. I think overall the polling went well. I'd give it a pretty good grade. I thought Suffolk's polling was really good as well.
Yep.
We weren't number one like we were in 2022, but we were up there. There were some other pollsters that really nailed it better than we did. But you just want to be in that top whatever percent, 1%, 5%, year after year, and you'll have a good long-term average. In terms of the different methodologies, we do both. We do the national polling and we do statewide polling in swing states. I think the swing state samples have to be bigger because, you can't do 500 completes in Pennsylvania and then draw conclusions about the 60 respondents who were blacks. That's just too, and that's why I got frustrated and I pitched to USA Today. People are drawing conclusions about black voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan on subsamples that are way too small. Right. And we need to do an exclusive poll of only likely black voters to actually figure out whether or not Trump had traction, and he did with the younger blacks. So I think bigger samples at the statewide level for sure.
Let me just quickly ask you one thing too. Was there the same shy Trump voter phenomenon this time as last time?
There was, but it wasn't by the margins. I mean, it reduced from from 2 elections ago to last election to this election. And I think pollsters did adjust. Pollsters adjusted to make sure that the education levels had matched so that we were quoting those, and also that we were including a recall question
Mm-hmm.
in the polling, because you could come out with Biden +8, but if in the recall Biden was +13, Biden's doing weaker than he was, and the 13 was way off anyway. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think both adjustments were made, but I still think that there was some undercounting of Trump voters by some pollsters. I mean, CNN, for example, in Wisconsin had Harris winning by 6, and that was like within 10 days of the election.
Yeah.
So instead of talking about the Suffolk polling, I had to answer to why the polls were wrong in Wisconsin and in other states and what happened in Iowa. I spent a lot of time explaining what happened in Iowa when we should have been talking about polling in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think generally the industry did a much better job. I also think we should be asking more often things like, regardless of who you're going to vote for, how do you think your neighbors and friends and relatives are going to vote? Who do you think they think is going to win? I think that's often been in terms of predictive value, I think that's one that really we should think about using more. Dave Williams, what do you think? How did we do as an industry?
I think we did better, and I think generally, that there are significant improvements. I think from the two previous elections, and I think you're onto something. Unfortunately, when you're at roughly a 50-50 split, as we all know, the margin of error is at its widest at a 50-50 split. So nationally, we're looking at 50-50, whereas, and I think you are 100% correct on this. If you look at regionally, those numbers, I think you see, less of a divergence, or more of a divergence between Republicans and Democrats on a regional basis. East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country, South versus the North Central kind of parts of the state. So, the country, excuse me. So I think you're right on that. I think larger sample sizes that focus, regionally. And of course, since we are technically not a majoritarian rule, it's the electoral college. The states really do make up a tremendous amount of importance in this. And so I think when you're getting into these areas where there's just such even division nationally, the focus has to be returned to the smaller areas. And of course, Dave is absolutely correct. You can't make substantive decisions on subsets of samples if you're talking less than 100 interviews. It's just ridiculous.
Okay, we only got about 5 minutes left. I want to get to the question of where the two parties go from here in the wake of the 2024 results. So, we can all give both parties some free advice here. Not that they take it, but let's try it. Do either of you think the Democrats have to abandon the progressive agenda and move to the center in order to win national elections now? Dave Paleologos, what do you think?
I think they need to move to the center, but preserve some issues that are winning issues by progressive candidates, like healthcare and abortion rights. And a lot of people think protecting Social Security is a Democratic issue still, especially among older voters. In terms of Republicans can't overplay their hand. And with Trump at the helm, that could happen. He could get bristled, he could get cocky, but someone needs to explain to him that although he won a landslide victory electorally, he did not win a majority of the popular vote. He got 49.8% of the vote, which means that a majority of the voters on election day did not vote for him. So he needs to be humbled by the fact that he still has some work to do. He needs the coalition build. Can't be name calling and backbiting within Republicanism. And they are known for that. And Dave Williams knows this better than I. They're all angling and jockeying for positions right now. So there's a lot of whispering going on, and you don't want that happening. You really want a unified, loyal team. And I think Trump's making his best effort to put that coalition together. We're going to be going in the field immediately after the first of the year with a national poll, and we'll field it, I don't know, from the 2nd to the 6th, and releasing it the first or second week of January. So We're going to try and get to people's perceptions and what they think about some of the policies and programs that Trump wants to put forward. My guess is that they'll be pretty popular, or he wouldn't be putting them forward, but you never know. So we'll see when we get out in the field.
Yeah, probably not making Canada the 51st state, though. Dave Williams, do Democrats have to abandon the progressive agenda and move to the center? And will the MAGA movement end with this final Trump term, or does it go on?
Well, I think we have to remember that Trump is essentially a lame duck. So, I mean, while he tends to have a significant amount of influence, there's still this whole institutional side of the Republican Party, whether you're in the House or in the Senate, and they're all going to be angling to maintain their institutional integrity, I think. Not to mention the courts as well. So I think the thought that somehow Trump has the ability, and I think Dave's absolutely correct that, you know, having less than a majority is really a big number. So I think that his ability to kind of steamroll through things, and I would agree with Dave. I think he's going to pick and choose. He wants to end this thing on a positive note. I think he's tempered himself a little bit. I think getting shot in the head actually has a tendency to make you think about things a little bit more than maybe you might have in the past.
Makes you focus a little, yeah.
Exactly. So we'll see if it humbles him. For the Democrats, I think the playbook is there. It's what Clinton did. You can't abandon some of those progressive policies, but clearly they've got to move more towards the center. I mean, it's just very clear. And I think, looking at AOC's failed bid to kind of get into leadership, is a signal that the party understands that they, we want to move in this direction, but you can't move too far too fast. And I think the problem that they had was this movement, to the left, to the progressive left, if you will, was just too significant in too short a time.
Okay, let me interrupt you because we're just coming up to the end here. I want to thank you both for this stimulating discussion. I was going to ask everybody to project who the tickets would be in 2028. I don't know if we'll have time for it. Mine would be Beshear versus Vance. Dave Paleologos, what do you think?
Oh, I'll know after we get out in the field in January. Gotcha. I'm not guessing on that.
Okay.
I think it's going to be Vance. I think Vance has got the inside track, but I'm more looking at Shapiro or Newsom, particularly Shapiro. And I think that was probably one of the biggest mistakes that Harris made was not picking Shapiro as her running